and this is, there's nothing new under the sun, and this is certainly not a brand new way of looking at trends. This is the way that a lot of people who track trends for a living do it. But a trend is not the same thing as a sociocultural movement. A trend is a manifestation that falls out of some movement that happens in the world. And so you have your sociocultural movement. This may be, like we're talking about, a moment of seismic change, a moment of shock. If you think about, right. So there's this sociocultural thing that happens in the world, and people are going to, just like we were talking about, are going to respond to it in different ways. And it tends to act, and this is a very simplified version of the model, but it tends to act like a pendulum. So you have these backlash trends that manifest, you have these arguably momentum trends that you could call, regressive and progressive, that also fall out of whatever has happened in the world. And you could also argue which ones are backlash and which ones are momentum, especially when you have the kind of seismic shift that's happening. Okay. But it's a nice way to kind of think about it, because you're always going to have sort of one reaction, and then you're going to have a reaction to that reaction. So it's a very interesting way to kind of think about how the world swings, basically pivots on some of these big, large seismic shifts that happen. Now, this is something that I put together just to help kind of demonstrate it to clients. This is one, and I know that a lot of trends folks have used September 11th, because it's so easy to kind of backcast against, September 11th and really be able to very easily see kind of what fell out of it. But if you look at the pendulum post 9/11, and again, this was unique to the US, but there was this sort of reaction of wanting to be safe, wanting to feel secure, wanting to have comfort and security and creature comforts. And then there was a different swing that was really about the sociocultural response to this, which might be based in fear, but it might be more proactive. It might be more about, not being able to trust the world, so I'm going to create the world for myself, or I don't trust my government's response, or I don't trust my government, right? And so, here's how I'm going to react to it. So that response was a little more nihilistic, a little more postmodern in terms of like, let's look at this and deconstruct it and try and understand what happened, right? So there was a frustration and anger, but there was also this really interesting austerity. And you see the trends that manifest out of something like that are quite unique and different, but you can absolutely track them. There was a huge trend in interiors to be soft and bubblegum-like and and modern, but reminiscent of the 50s. So the palettes were really soft. The curves were quite soft. The design, the lines were quite simple. But then you also saw a lot of really provocative stuff in interiors around, bringing street art in, bringing a sense of a literal deconstruction into the home, so that things were half painted, or things are defaced, or things are, classical, like that example of the little classical chair, the classical chair reimagined to be made of silver spray paint and bright blue, and so you can see these things kind of butting up against one another, but you can absolutely also see how both of them have justifiably fallen out of what happened, that event, right? You see it in narratives, like in film. You see it in materiality. We were laughing because I said this is when the river stone made a big entree, right? Everybody had like a beautiful bowl of river stones in their house, right? But also people were using like sort of rust and layered paints that have been scratched off, and metals, like more raw elements, So this is kind of what happens. And I was thinking about it for COVID. And I think it's actually quite similar. I think the part that I'm still thinking about is, what we were speaking about before, which was the universality of it versus a sort of a national identity. So 9/11 definitely had a national identity, attached to that. And no matter how different Americans were, they all felt American in that moment. And in some ways, COVID is different than that because it's so universal and global, right?
Right.
But again, just to kind of look really quickly, you see this sort of swing, and I wonder if we aren't going to sort of want to be in this place of back to basics, modern fundamentals. I called it cocooned austerity, where we're all afraid of the food supply chains, having trouble with food supply. People are planting gardens, people are just keeping it simple.
Right. Right.
But then there's also going to be this desperate need for experience, right? And what's interesting to me about the swing forward is that this is where I think marketers are going to have a really wonderful opportunity to reinvent, reimagine, and sort of recreate brand experience in new ways, and it's not that we don't already have the tools. We do have online presence and virtual experiences when you go into brick and mortar stores and things like that, but the reality of it is, there we go. Are we still on?
You're good.
Okay, great. Yeah. But the reality of it is, we're going to have to kind of reinvent the way that we were even doing that.
Right.
If we want to bring, if people are going to be in their houses for 18 months, what do we do with that? And then even the more interesting question is, because we kind of understand what that looks like, the more interesting question is, what are we going to be like on the other side? Like, to me, that's a really provocative question. I'm an introvert. I've been okay being in the house. Am I going to want to talk to people as much as I was forced to talk to people before this happened?
Right.
These are great questions. Like, is it going to change our character?
Right. Well, much like 9/11, I would say we never went back to normal after 9/11. There was a new normal that was set.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
it's kind of like, which changes in behavior do we think are actually going to sustain well beyond this pandemic is behind us? But I love that model because, I love the options that are out there for brands, right? It's like in the cocooned austerity, it's like, how can you reinforce the safety, the security, the maybe medicinal angle that your brand might have? But then I also love in the I'll call it the hyper experiential. Like, that is a huge challenge in a virtual world.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
There's huge upside to unlocking technology.
Yeah.
And also, how do you keep a human experience as well in this world?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think that there are emotional opportunities on both sides too, with the comfort and security. Comfort is a very, very important emotional need. This is like safety and security is one of those, low on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These are fundamentals. Like, these are fundamentals that you need to raise good kids. These are fundamentals that we all need to feel sane and safe.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of emotionally loaded, I think, opportunity there, as is, to your point, in that experience space.
I also can't help but think the role of design,
huge
in both trend segments, but particularly in that experiential. I mean, even if you think your product is so simple, it does, it has a routine task.
Yeah.
Design can really help elevate in a more experiential world. And I think that's another thing that marketers can really think about is, should they elevate or alter design? Because people are going to be yearning for small delights. We already are, quite frankly.
Yes, exactly. That's a wonderful way to put it. People will be looking for small delights, and they will be looking for opportunities to, escape. There is an escape element on that right-hand side, right? Like, we have a reality that there is no negotiating it. It's we don't have an opportunity to physically escape it. So how do we find those little, those little pivot points where we can shift our perspective, where we can give ourselves, sort of the gift of a little bit of a different experience. And and on the other side, from an emotional standpoint, in the comfort area, what are those little things that make people feel more comfortable? Like this is personal, but I say that I'm very analytical, and that what is happening around us is actually quite thrilling to me. And that's not true. That's not untrue. That's very true. And yet, this has, since COVID, this has been my coffee mug. I have beautiful, fancy Pottery Barn coffee mugs. I've been using my Tim Hortons hockey with real hockey puck on the bottom, you know, as this is my comfort mug. And it didn't even ever occur to me until
Look at that.
I really thought about it. I pulled it out. My husband's like, "Why are you suddenly using that mug all the time? It's so heavy and awkward." And I'm like, "It's my Tim Hortons. It's my Canadian mug. I need to have it."
That's good. Those kind